introducing immigration, I would remind you that all U.S. citizens, except Native Americans, that you are historically an immigrant. You come from immigrants and your ancestors. I would ask you to take just a moment here and look at the person beside you and ask them about their immigration history and where their family came from. Just take a minute.
Tom, where are you from? Where's your family from?
Cardiff, Wales.
Two of my great-grandparents.
Oh, really? How exciting.
I guess.
I'm kind of a mongrel. I'm from all over Europe, so yeah, but mostly Ireland and Scotland. So we were practically neighbors.
I understand there's lots of tillage.
Younger brother is the only one.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Sort of a common
Have you
name.
ever been there? Okay.
I've been to.
That's why they came?
Yeah. But I've never been to Wales.
Okay.
The whole persecution thing.
And ours is not that old.
We go to Europe. We almost always go to Germany. I love Germany.
I have never been there.
My heritage is Swiss and Welsh, so it's very interesting. And the explosion of Ancestry.com, does anybody do that? Go online and find out. American democracy aims to give the people a voice in government. One must note that the term "we the people" is constantly changing. In the first census in 1790, there were about 4 million people in the United States, and they were mostly on the East Coast and of English or Northern European descent. At that time, 1 in 5 Americans was of African heritage, origin. Native Americans were not included in that census. You come forward to just a little over 100 years, to 1900, the population grew to 96 million. That's an increase of 72 million in 100 years. The greatest immigration to the United States was between 1880 and 1920. That period is known as the Old Immigration. And in that period, it was mostly Irish and Germans who came to the United States. As a population grows and becomes more diverse, it causes concerns about whether a country can absorb such large numbers. We get concerned about changes in language, religion, political views, and even food. If you think back 30 years in Lancaster County, the most exotic restaurant we had was Italian, and that was probably a Pizza Hut. But now we have Chinese, Japanese, Himalayan, Greek, Thai, on and on the things we can have as diversity. We will hear from our panelists today, and they will answer some of our questions, and probably puzzling questions about immigration. They will speak, and Barbara Broder will moderate. After that, we will then have a question and answer period. I would like to thank the panelists and Barbara Broder, who is our moderator. She is the executive editor at Lancaster Newspapers. She has been at the paper for
Too long. Yes.
reporter and had focused on political events over the years. So, thank you very much, and we will begin with the panel.
Well, thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to start by going through the panel and just giving you a little bit of information about who they are, and then I will turn it over to them because they're the ones you really came to hear today. To my far right, we have Mary Weaver, who is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Immigration Resource Center, and that's based in York. And this organization was founded in 1996 on the principles of service and access to justice in response to the detention of refugees of the Golden Venture. Next to her, we have Oscar Barbosa, who is an immigration attorney in Lancaster, and you're with the Diaspora Law. And to my right is Tom Tillett, who we just discovered our ancestors may have been close to each other in the British Isles. He is the District Chief of Staff for U.S. Representative Joe Pitts, and he has a long history of involvement in politics and government here. He also served in the office of former Representative Bob Walker. To my left, we have Sheila Mastropietro, who has been working in refugee settlement for Church World Service and the Immigration and Refugee Program since the late 1980s, and first as a sponsorship developer and a coordinator of the CWS affiliate office in Lancaster. You have a lot of credentials here. Let me make sure I get them right. With her is Cam Mang. He is a Burmese refugee who also works now as an employment specialist with Church World Service, and I promised him I'm not going to steal his thunder and tell his story. I'll let him do that. And then finally, we have Chris Herr, who is here. He is the Executive Vice President of PenAg Industries Association, and in that role, he is responsible for the overall management of the association, the Service Corporation, and PenAg Insurance Group. So with that, Mary, I'm going to have you start. Oh, Sheila's starting. Okay, Sheila's starting.
I'm with Church World Service Immigration and Refugee Program. We've been in Lancaster since 1987 resettling refugees. And I'm going to go through this information kind of quickly because right after me I'm going to introduce one of my now co-workers who entered the country as a refugee, and he's going to tell you about his story coming here. In Lancaster right now we resettle about 300 refugees every year, and about 300 refugees every year and 75 Cuban Haitian entrants. It's a different status that the Immigration Service gives Cubans and Haitians, but they are not refugees. Refugees, this is the definition of a refugee. You are outside of your homeland. You fled because you've been persecuted for one of these 5 reasons: race, religion, nationality, ethnicity, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And you are unable or unwilling to return home because of the persecution that you would face. You would be interested to know, you might be interested to know that there are 15 million refugees in the world today, and fewer than 1% are given the chance for resettlement in a third country. And that doesn't even count the 28 million people who are internally displaced, still in their country, but away from their homes. And the steps to resettlement are this. First, the refugee has to flee his homeland. Then he seeks protection. There are 3 options once a refugee has fled his homeland. He could wait until things stabilize in his country and be repatriated, returned to his country. He could stay in the country to which he first fled. That's the country of first asylum. Many times that's not a possibility. The receiving country is unable to integrate a number of refugees, as we're seeing now in Lebanon and Jordan with the Syrians who are coming. Or the third option is be resettled as a refugee into a third country. Access to the U.S. refugee program is one of the options. The United States resettles more refugees than any other country. Congress determines how many people we will resettle every year. Right now it's at 70,000. Canada and Australia are the next 2 biggest countries who receive refugees, and Canada receives about 14,000, and Australia 20,000. So we are far and above the country who receives the most refugees. But when you look at our population, we take in the lowest number proportionate to our population. So a refugee must be screened by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and then if they're determined to have refugee status, and they want to go to the U.S., or they are being considered by the U.S., they are interviewed by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Department of State. They have to prove that they have a credible fear of persecution. And then if they're granted approval, then they can come. But as I said, fewer than 1% are resettled, so it's 70,000 might seem like a lot of people, but it's when you look at all the refugees in the world, it's a very low number, actually. So there are 9 agencies in the U.S. who have a contract with the Department of State to resettle refugees. My agency, Church World Service, is one of those 9. We have offices in 33 cities in the U.S. We all service the local area. The region that I can cover is a 50-mile radius of Lancaster. Here in Lancaster, we also have a office of the Lutheran Immigrant and Refugee Services, and they're also resettling refugees here. Excuse me. They're a bit smaller than us. They resettle, I would say, around 200 refugees a year. So then the case it's got the approval, it comes to the Refugee Data Center in New York, and then it's allocated out to one of the 9 agencies, comes to CWS, and then CWS allocates it to one of their 33 offices. And that's how I receive a case. Many times I receive a case because an anchor relative, we call it, a close relative has been resettled here in Lancaster, and a family member is coming to join them. What we do, our goals are to provide refugees with their basic needs for the first 90 days. The funding that we receive comes from Department of State, and they ask us to do really only this for the first 90 days, to provide everything a refugee needs: clothing, food, shelter, and safety and security. As you can imagine, 90 days is not enough time for a refugee to be totally integrated into the community. It takes years and years. So we seek funds from other government agencies, private foundations, individual contributors, to fund other programs to support the resettlement. And that falls into our economic self-sufficiency. That's one of our primary goals, is to help refugees become self-sufficient as soon as possible. We are aiming for 3 months to 6 months to become economically self-sufficient. It is possible in most cases, but certainly not in all, and we have other programs to help refugees beyond that. And finally, to help refugees integrate into the community so that they can become citizens themselves, that they can become aware of how they can change policies, how they can affect the community, how they can give back, and of course, to go on into the future, become citizens and vote. This is what we are funded to do: welcome refugees at the airport, provide housing, furniture, food, clothing, transportation to medical appointments, help them make a referral to a job placement. We actually have a program for job placements. We refer to that program. School registration, referral to an English language class, and a cultural orientation. The arrivals by country, the circle graph, is what has been happening in the past couple of years. The majority are ethnic Nepali people from Bhutan. Different minority ethnicities from Burma is the next greatest population. After that, this is a little skewed. We had a large Russian family, I think, the former Soviet Union. We're really not getting many of those refugees anymore. Primarily, the other groups are composed of Iraqis and Sudanese, Somali, Ethiopian, Eritrean, and now some Congolese. So we're looking at a public-private partnership, and this is what the Department of State always intended, that they would give us money for those first 30 days, and that we would partner with other agencies in our community to help a refugee beyond that. So these are the ways, these are how we partner with the private sector, grants and donations, family foundations, individuals, universities, community connections, co-sponsoring groups, church groups, as well as civic groups. And the people that we're resettling now. First, I have the Burmese ethnic minorities. We've been resettling them since 2007. They have been living in refugee camps on the Thai-Burma border for, many of them, for up to 20 years. They are fleeing a civil war in Burma. Many, the people that we are receiving are the minority ethnicities, like the Chin, the Karen, the Karenni, the Mon, and what else can I say? I'm trying to rush through this. And our majority population right now, the Bhutanese, they are ethnic Nepali. Their ancestors fled to Bhutan in the 19th century, where they were never integrated. The majority population in Bhutan is Buddhist. They speak their own language, and the Nepalis who went there for farmland and to make a new life are Nepali speaking. They are Hindu or Christian. They never fit in, and it was in the early part of the 20th century that the Bhutanese government said either you integrate or you leave, and they expelled most of that population. They went back to Nepal, and Nepal was not able to integrate them. So they kept them in refugee camps where they too spent up to 20 years before they came here to the U.S. And the Iraqis. We began receiving the Iraqis in 2008. In the beginning, we were getting Iraqi refugees who had helped the U.S. military in Iraq, and then we are still receiving Iraqis, and these are people sometimes directly out of Baghdad, but more often they fled to Jordan, and that's who we're resettling now. The African populations, we're now getting a smaller group of Congolese who have, many of whom have suffered trauma through the massacre in the Mudende. There's a Mudende refugee camp in Rwanda who suffered two horrible attacks in 1997. These refugees fled to the refugee camp for protection, seeking protection, and the camps were attacked by Hutus 2 times, where they slaughtered a great number of people. And the ones we're receiving now are survivors of those attacks. We look for community involvement, of course, as I said, from church co-sponsors, civic groups. We have a number of university connections with Franklin and Marshall and Millersville College, but we definitely need this in order to take a refugee beyond those first 90 days. These are various ways we look for volunteers. We have a full core of volunteers from the community and also student interns. We have 11 student interns every semester. We look, of course, for donations from the community in the form of furniture, financial, and good, Dave's speeding me right on to the end. So this is we are on Facebook if you want to friend us on Facebook, and you can always find out more information about what we're up to and how you can help. So I believe Barbara is going to introduce Cam, or should I? Okay, so I'm going to introduce to you Cam Sin Mang. As I said, he came from Burma 7 years ago. I'm not really sure, he'll tell you. And he is of the Chin ethnicity, and he's going to tell you his story.
Hello? I think you can hear me. My name is Cam, and I'm very thankful to every one of you, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share the story of my life. And also, I'm going to pretend like a native speaker so that I can finish my job on time. I'm still in English. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I have one kid here in Lancaster. I come from Chin ethnic group, Chin state in Burma. I have four sisters, 6 brothers and 4 sisters. I have a big family in Burma. And back home in my country, soon after I finished high school, I went to India to study theological college, and then I finished my bachelor degree in theology. And then I was actually very ambitious to become like a local pastor. So when I went back to Burma, I changed my mind. I wanted to pursue further studies so that I can serve God in a better way. And I was actually traveling on my way back to India. So in one of the cities in Chin State, before traveling out from Chin State, which is Hakatong, I was arrested by two guys who wore a civil uniform, and then I was actually taken to lockup for 2 days and 2 nights, and then they after interrogation and then after being tortured, I was transferred to a bigger prison in Kalemyuk town in Sakang division. So in there I was staying there for about 3 months. Actually, I was supposed to be there for like 6 months before they intended to send me to another place. But they forced me to do like forced labor, and then sometimes they send me out to like the jungle, like they put shake on my leg, which would actually block me from working. Like I was unable to like actually work, but because of the forced labor, I already got sick in the jungle, and then they sent me back to the prison. And then in this period of time, I was interrogated and then questioned and being beaten and then tortured because I was belonging to the Chin ethnic group. So Chin ethnic group are considered the rebel by the government because in our Chin state itself, we have a group of people called Chin National Army, which oppose the government till today. So because of this reason, without actually finding who I was, they just arrested me and they torture me and they interrogate me for no reason. Because I belong to Chin ethnic group and then I belong to Christianity. So as some of you may know, Myanmar is the people of the Burman people, they are majority of the people are Buddhism. So they, long before we had a history when the Burman people actually try to Burmanize or any other ethnic group. So that's the way how they try to do. In some occasion, which I personally witnessed, the Burmese soldier come to villages and then they force people for forced labor and they're poultry, and then they rape them at the same time, and that's part of the practice that they have in in the group. Whenever they go out, whether you go to church, whether you are worshiping God, whether you are working on your farm, doesn't matter. If they see you, they just tag you to carry their stuff, and then they will never tell you how long are you going to travel. So that's where I come from. And then in the recent year, because of the American missionary couple back in 1898, right, Dev? Yeah, that's when American couple came to our state, and they are the first missionary couple to our state, and then they teach them how to wear. They teach them like the Bible, and then we have like our literature. But the Burmese government actually banned the Chin people from learning their language. But recently there has been some political changes, and hopefully things will get better. So that's where I come from. And then after escaping military persecution, I had to run away from my country, because if I had to go back, I was going to be arrested or be killed by the soldier. So traveling between the border of Thailand and Burma was very, very hard thing. Along with other refugee ethnic group, other refugee, we had to sneak into Thailand border, and then we had to avoid like Thai immigration office, and then by boat and by walk and by car, it took 13 days to arrive in Malaysia. So there are times when they put 3 people in the truck, not stretching hand, not stretching leg. You just had to kind of like squeeze yourself and then spend like 5 to 6 hours to reach to another place where another smuggler will be waiting for you. And then a minivan which about 5 or 6 people can fit, they put 18 to 20 people. So I had to travel like that for like another 6 hours. And then from between the border of Thailand to Burma, Thailand to Malaysia, it took about 5 hours. I was actually squeezing myself in the small taxi truck along with another 2 refugees. So I was very fortunate that I was not dead by the time I arrived in Malaysia. So that's not the end. When I arrived in Malaysia, Malaysian government back in 1952 UN convention, the Malaysian government did not sign an agreement that each country would receive refugee. So they are just understanding other people's situation, that they are just receiving refugee. But when refugee arrive in Malaysia, refugees are considered illegal immigrant. So the Malaysian government also formed a group of people called RELA. So they are given full power to arrest refugees, and then they can put them in prison, and then they can send back to like Burma. So in that situation, when I was in back in 2000, the end of 2002, living in the city was very, very tough, because each time you go out, police are like everywhere and they are looking for you. So I decided to live in the jungle instead of living in the city, because I thought it would be a good idea to live in the jungle because it would be safe. And then unfortunately, I was again arrested by the Malaysian police in 2003, and they tried to deport me to Burma again. I was sent to Lancaster detention camp, where I spent for 1 month. And in that camp, what happened was there are a few blocks. One block has about only 50 to like 60 people can live, but they put like 300 people in there. And then there are only 2 toilets. So I'm not going to go into the detail. It's very, very hard life. There are only 2 toilets, and there would be a time when they say, you guys are illegal immigrants, you should never come back to Malaysia. And then they did not give us water. So during during that month, just the 1 month period, it's very hard life, very, very tough life, because in the morning they gave the inmate 1 piece of biscuit and 1 cup of tea, and the lunch is like half cooked rice, 1 handful half cooked rice, and then a piece of 1 salty fish. And then they deport me back to, after 1 month of detention, I was deported to Thailand and Burma border. But I had to find ways to come back to Malaysia to survive, because there was no way I could go back to my home country. And then by the end of 2006, I was able to volunteer international organization for migration. And then after a few months, I was applied for the post of interpreter UNHCR office, and I got accepted. And then I was able to help other refugees, and my life was a little bit safer after working for UNHCR office. And then I had the chance to work for United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee for 2 years, and then finally I got accepted by United States, and then I came here to the United States in 2008. And I am so glad and so thankful to the Lancaster people, Lancaster County, and to all the people who has been helping, and then having a very good heart to welcome refugees and who will be coming in, the coming months and the coming years also. And I worked with Sheila hired me back in 2010, and then I have been still working for her, and then I love what I do. And then thank you very much, and thank you so much for welcoming these new people and who have new hope and new life, and escaping from military persecution because of their religion, because of their belief, and because of their ethnicity, like me. Thank you very much.
We'll move on to Chris Herr now, and I think what we will do is go a little bit beyond the time that's allowed, so we'll still take this to about 10 minutes after 9 panelists, and then we'll still have 20 minutes for questions. Okay?
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for stepping out. It's easy to address the easy issues. I appreciate you addressing a very difficult issue. A little bit about me. Part of the first family of Lancaster County. Family immigrated here. The Hans Herr House and first settlers of Lancaster County, so have some history here. A little bit about Penn Ag. we're a trade association that represents about 600 agribusinesses here in Pennsylvania. If you drive Route 222 or Route 30 or Route 283, about every third truck may be a company that I represent, whether it's a feed mill, a chicken processing company, any number of service organizations within agriculture. Those are the kind of members that I have and are prominently located here in Lancaster County. In Lancaster County, just a bit about that. The number one non-irrigated agriculture county in America. We have a farm economy here in Lancaster County larger than 14 states. We are rated in the top 10 in 30 different commodities in America. So a very diverse, very strong, very large agricultural economy here in Lancaster County. Pennsylvania as a whole, it's almost a $70 billion a year industry, and represents about $7 billion directly off the farm. So agriculture is significant here in Lancaster County and in Pennsylvania. A difficult issue, immigration. You would think many of the folks I represent, very conservative, maybe even a few Tea Party representatives as part of my organization. And immigration may be something that initially you would think we would be like some of those in the House, in Congress, would be very much against. That is not the case. There's a tremendous disconnect when it comes to food and agriculture here in America, and I'll share with you a brief situation that happened to me about 15 years ago when I was at the Ag Department. I gave a short speech on the importance of agriculture, and after that speech took a few questions, and a woman asked me a question, why was it necessary to slaughter livestock when you could just go to the supermarket and purchase meat? It's a true story. It happened in a neighboring county, a very large agriculture county. Shortly after she said that, she knew exactly what she said, but there was a clear disconnect between her perception of agriculture and her perception of food. And I think we have that same perception issue when it comes to immigration. The way I see this issue for Lancaster County, for Pennsylvania, for America, it is an issue of national security. Many of you will remember the late 70s waiting in line for gasoline. We relied on other parts of the world for our energy. I believe that it's a scary thought to rely on other parts of the world for our food. Each winter there's this major conspiracy between farmers and weathermen that many of you know about. The weatherman calls for a weather event in cooperation with the farmer, and you as citizens run out to your supermarkets and purchase milk and eggs and bread and just about anything else you can get your hands on. I would hate to see if we really had a food emergency where for more than 24 hours or maybe 48 we did not have access to food. But that's clearly what we would face if we did not have the workers that provide in our processing, in our production areas of our farm economy, who come from different countries. It's estimated that there are between 1 million and 1.5 million folks that work in our agriculture, processing, and production sectors who are from other countries. It's also estimated that between about half of those are likely to be undocumented. About those workers, it has been estimated that for each one of those immigrant workers, they provide a job for between 2 and 3 other American workers. So it's an important transformation between having those workers and what they their effect on other sectors within the agriculture economy. We could get into talking about comprehensive immigration reform, and some of the other speakers may do that. I have mostly been focused on reform for agricultural workers here in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania and in America. And what I found is, and I've been beat up by many folks who differ on this issue, first of all, the major misconception is that these workers are taking away jobs that Americans should and would do. Just not true. And we can argue about that till the cows come home or till the eggs need collected, but that is just not the case. We have Amishmen who are hiring Mexicans. I think that here in Lancaster County gives you a little bit of a perspective. If there were American workers who were willing to do these jobs, they would certainly be hired, and they have been given opportunities. And the evidence just certainly indicates that these folks are not taking away jobs. We just don't have Americans who will milk cows, who will work with livestock, who will process food, and who do it not at minimum wage, but above minimum wage, $10 to $20 an hour. So these are not, minimum wage jobs that we're talking about. Back to the issue, these folks are, for the most part, not seeking citizenship. This is not seen as a pathway to citizenship. These are folks who want to work and do a very good job at these types of jobs. They want to work here. They want to be able to, as freely as possible, go back to their home countries, send money back, and visit from time to time, and have a safe and reliable access back to these jobs in the United States. There's been a lot of talk about, with immigration reform, just enforcement. And that to the farm community is a scary prospect. And it should be also a scary prospect to the consumers and to the citizens of the United States. It's estimated that if we had an enforcement-only program, that food prices would would go up about 6%. Now that may not seem like a lot in the United States, where we spend less than 10% of our disposable income on food. We're fortunate that is the case, but still a 6% increase is significant. In some of the other sectors, livestock and meat prices would likely rise between 13 and 27%, and fruits and vegetables between 15 and 30%. It's estimated that these workers if we had a comprehensive program, could boost the U.S. economy by about 3.5%. If we had a comprehensive immigration program, these farm workers would reduce the budget deficit by $850 billion a year, and that they would add an additional $300 billion to the Social Security program. Again, it's a complicated issue when you get into all the complexities of comprehensive reform, but again, from the agricultural sector, the largest industry in Pennsylvania and certainly the largest industry in Lancaster County, it's critical that we have a pragmatic solution to this problem, or face what the EU, much of Europe is already facing. They're not able to feed themselves, and they rely on other parts of the world to do that. And again, the prospect of that here in America is and should be one of the most scary prospects out there. So again, a little bit of perspective from the agricultural standpoint. Appreciate the opportunity to share that with you today, and hopefully at least have you think about this and think about the complexities of it and recognize that it's not as black and white as many would have you believe. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to Tom Tillett. Tom Tillett, who's going to talk about immigration law as it stands now.
Good morning. Thanks for all of you coming out this morning. I apologize that the boss cannot be here. They're in session this week, so he's down in D.C. One thing that I would say on behalf of the League is that having these public policy forums is extraordinarily important. Public policy in this day and age can be very nuanced and very complex. And the more that the general public knows about these issues and your knowledge base and being aware of the very, very difficult decisions that we face as a nation, the more that you know is very important for our society as a whole. And one thing, I'm sort of preaching to the choir this morning, but one thing that you all know is that there are a lot of low information voters out there. And that would probably not apply to you here in this room this morning, but those low information voters, they oftentimes have misconstrued ideas about public policy, and things like this and the activities of the League, those are very, very important to try to get more information out there to the American people. I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. I'm going to probably talk fairly fast. I'm going to cover three things this morning. I'm going to cover current immigration law, very quickly albeit. I'm going to talk about what's going on in the House, what's going on in the Senate regarding immigration reform, and then I'm going to go out on a lake with very thin ice, and I'm going to talk about the politics of immigration reform. First of all, and Sheila did a wonderful job explaining about the one aspect of U.S. immigration law, and U.S. immigration law is based upon three what I would call foundational principles. The first one is it's family-based. The second principle, U.S. immigration law, is employment-based, and the third foundational principle is that U.S. immigration law is based upon humanitarian concerns. To talk first a little bit about based on family reunification. The idea is very simple, to keep families together. If there's someone in the United States as a citizen or as a legal permanent resident or an LPR, those individuals have the ability to petition to bring family members to the United States. It is a very complicated system. There are preference categories. There are quotas established every year. But that is really the number one foundational principle of U.S. immigration law. Approximately 1 million individuals come to the United States every year legally under that system, and about 66% of that 1 million are people coming here as a part of family reunification. The second one, as I said, is employment-based. This is both temporary and part-time to come to the United States to work on a temporary basis. There are a little over 20 different visas that are available to people around the world to come here and work, albeit on a temporary basis. And then there's also permanent visas that are given for long-term work on a permanent basis. There are about 140,000 of those visas available every year to come to the United States to work permanently. The third thing, and like I said, Sheila did a wonderful job talking about this. There are refugees, asylees. There's also a temporary protected status program and a deferred and forced departure program. The first two are probably the most common ones that you know about. I'm not sure if Sheila mentioned this or not, but the refugee program is more based upon people that have not come to the United States yet. Many times they're in what are known as a transition country, and they apply for refugee status. Last year, a little over 58,000 people were granted refugee status. The second main one is the asylum program. Oftentimes, and there's two kinds of asylum. There's a regular asylum, and there's something called a derivative asylum. And those are normally, asylees normally apply when they're at a port of entry into the United States or they're already here. Last year, between the two asylee programs, about 25,000 individuals in 2012 were granted asylee status under one of those two programs. The legislative outlook. Last June, the United States Senate passed S. 744, which was a comprehensive immigration reform package. It's very long, it's very complicated. I would really strongly encourage you, if you want to get into the weeds a little bit more about the Senate passed bill and also the House equivalents, the Migration Policy Institute. Migration Policy Institute. They have a wonderful side-by-side summary of both what passed the Senate and the 5 bills that are moving in the House. They have a wonderful side-by-side analysis of the bills. And like I said, if you're interested in getting down into the weeds a little bit more, I would recommend that. Very quickly, to summarize a very, very complicated bill, border security. The Senate bill spends about $46 billion on border security. Originally, they were going to spend about $4 billion, and literally over the course of a weekend, the number went from $4 billion to $46 billion. And that was mainly to get more senators on the bill. It also reformed the immigrant visa programs and also immigrant integration. It also addressed the visa issue. As many of you know, at both ends of sort of the skill pay scales, there are issues. There are issues at the lower end, and there's issues at the higher end. People come here, I'm sure you've all heard these stories. People come here, they're very bright, they're very intelligent. They go to MIT, they go to Stanford, they go to Harvard. They go to very, very well-regarded schools. They get their PhDs, and after they get their PhDs, what do they have to do? They have to go back to their home countries. And so the Senate bill is attempting to deal with sort of on the high end of the spectrum and also on the lower end of the spectrum. It also creates an E-Verify system that when an employer hires a new employee, they have to go through an E-Verify system to make sure that the person is in the country legally and has the necessary paperwork to work in the United States. I saved the controversial one to last. The Senate bill also created a path to citizenship. The Senate bill created a new category called a registered provisional immigrant, an RPI. I'm not going to get into the details unless you want to in the Q&A, but in order to become an RPI and then go through the process to become a naturalized citizen. It's very complicated, it's very, very long, and it's quite a process that a person has to go through in the Senate bill to become a U.S. citizen. It involves years and years of waiting. You must remain employed. You cannot be unemployed for more than 60 days. You have to go through background checks, have a fairly clean criminal record, prove that you've paid your taxes, that you were in the United States before a certain date, that you have ties to your community. It's a very, very arduous process. The House. Back in January, late January, Speaker Boehner came out with his immigration principles. And in the immigration principles, most of it was fairly non-controversial and straightforward. The Speaker did put in his immigration principles the idea of some type of path to legal status or some type of path to citizenship. That surprised a lot of people that he did that. At first, he was pushing it pretty aggressively, and then they backed away from it. As of right now, today, there are only 18 House members, mainly House Republicans, obviously, that have come out in favor of the Speaker's principles. Only 18 Republicans have publicly said that they support those principles that include a pathway to citizenship. Guess that was my Marco Rubio moment there. So, there are 5 bills that are pending right now in the House dealing with immigration reform. For the sake of time, I'm going to just read them real quickly. I'm not going to talk about each one unless you want to during the Q&A. The first one is called the Border Security Results Act. From the title of it, you can probably assume what it deals with. It deals with border security. The Skills Act is the sort of Senate equivalent of dealing with the highly skilled and highly educated folks in the United States to allow them to remain in the United States. The Ag Act deals with sort of the lower end of the spectrum, people that are in the United States working in agriculture, working in hotels, working in, on farms, working in landscape businesses, working for construction companies. So the Ag Act would sort of deal with the lower income, less skilled spectrum. The fourth thing is called the Legal Workforce Act, and that is simply the House version of E-Verify. And then finally, the SAFE Act would just really crack down on and be much more rigorous in looking at people that are in the United States right now to determine their legal status and then take the appropriate action. So those are the 5 bills in the House that are actually moving. There are 6 other immigration bills right now that have been offered in the U.S. House, but those are not moving. And then very quickly, the last part of this, and this is the one where I'm going to try to be very careful so I don't get into any trouble here, talking about the politics of immigration reform. The first thing that I would like to say, and I want to be a little hopeful here, except for the one big issue, sort of the 800-pound gorilla over in the corner, which is a pathway to citizenship or a pathway to a legal status. Other than that, which is very controversial, I'm not going to kid you. I'm sure you're all aware of that. Other than that, there are a lot of areas of immigration reform where both the Republicans and the Democrats, the House and the Senate, agree. So that's sort of the good news. The bad news is that there is a very, very different philosophy between the House and the Senate how to move. The Senate wants to deal with immigration reform comprehensively, one big bill, which it did last June. The House approach under Speaker Boehner is to move the bills more on a piecemeal basis, deal with each smaller bill, get it through the House, send it to the Senate, it passes the Senate, the President signs it into law. There are many individuals in Congress who do not favor the piecemeal approach, for the simple reason that they are afraid that if we do the non-controversial things, then we will tend to say, well, we did immigration reform and move on. I mean, that's oftentimes what happens in Congress. There's a huge problem, they deal with it in some way, and then they move on. And so the feeling is, if we would do the piecemeal approach and do the non-controversial things, what gets left behind? The pathway to citizenship or the pathway to a legal status. And of course, for a lot of individuals, that is really sort of the holy grail. That's the important one. So there's a big difference in opinion between the House and the Senate on how to deal with immigration reform. In closing, I want to be very clear on the prospects of immigration reform this year. Immigration reform is a very, very tough, complicated issue politically. It is a very, very highly charged political issue. At this point, I am not real optimistic, and if the congressman was here, he would obviously be saying the same thing. I'm a reflection of him. I am not very optimistic at this point that immigration reform will move through the House this year. Now, that could change. There are some people like Paul Ryan who believe that we can do some immigration reform this year, but at this point in time, I would be surprised if there's real immigration reform in the House this year. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to Mr. Barbosa and then right on to you. And what I'd like to do is to close this, if we can, by 9:15 or around that time so that we can take some questions.
Well, thank you to the League for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and to the speakers. As it was introduced before, I'm an immigration attorney. I deal on a daily basis with people that has to navigate this complicated system that we have briefly reviewed. Most of the clients came here for various reasons, and if they made it here, probably they were able to obtain a work visa or a family member petition for them, or perhaps they were running away from persecution. That means they came here legally, quote unquote. They have to not only come here and maintain a good status, make sure that their visa doesn't expire, they also have to have the opportunity to become permanent residents later on, and afterwards they can become citizens. There is a portion of the population that, because the system is not perfect, have to come through the border. They come here undocumented, or they come here and their visas expire. We're talking about probably over 11 million people that's in the country without status. What is the impact on their lives? What is the impact in the economy? What is the impact in society? It's what Congress and Senate has been discussed on how to remedy. We're not saying, none of us is saying that the U.S. system is unfair or is bad. As we compare with many other countries, the United States is one of the most welcoming countries, and we have a system in place that gives a fair opportunity to most people. But unfortunately, this system is broken. This system does not function, and as a country, we have a duty, and as a citizens, we have the duty to make sure that this system improves with whatever is possible. These 11 million people that live here undocumented, without documents, they are second-class residents in a way. They have lived for many years, they may have had kids, and they see this country as their home. A big portion of them would like to go back to their countries, and they don't want to become citizens. They just want to work, make money, maybe send something back. Some of them, although they come here with intention to work, they get to love this country and love their neighbors, and they want to remain. So a fair option should be given to those if they are deserving, if they are going to go above and beyond the requirements that the legislation might provide if the immigration reform comes through. But in any case, if whether or not the Senate and the House move forward, there are many things that we can do at the state level. Although federal law regulates immigration and regulates the process for which people can become legalized in this country, on a daily basis they live with fear, they live with barriers to carry a normal life. Some of the representatives have been very aggressive at deporting, at enforcing, at finding who's undocumented and taking them out of the country. The president has voiced his opinion on what the priorities are, and obviously we have a limited budget, and the economy is not on a great stand to make sure that every penny available is spent finding undocumented people to take them out. So the president has come forward and told the Department of Homeland Security to be very picky, to be very mindful of whether or not a person is a priority to be deported or not. What does this mean? It's a person that might have come in multiple times after multiple deportations to the country, that has committed grievous crimes, involved in very violent crimes, and has been found guilty of them: drug trafficking, human trafficking, trafficking of weapons. They've been convicted of a felony, perhaps. And if they're really a priority, then maybe we can spend money on a couple agents to find them and get them out. Obviously, most of the residents and citizens will not like to have a neighbor with such a background. But the great percentage of immigrants have not such a record, and they have their families. They may have even kids that are citizens. So they have to deal with the barriers I'm mentioning. They can't find a job. If they find a job, their labor rights might not be duly respected. Their wages might be stolen, their salary might be stolen, and they're left without recourse because they're afraid of coming forward and telling the authorities of what's going on at their job place. Likewise, many of their kids, even if they're citizens, they might face barriers to go for higher education because their parents are undocumented, they don't have tax records, or they don't have they don't have a social security to register themselves in FAFSA. So many of these kids, even if they are citizens, they might have face barriers in some institutions. Other of these kids that have been brought to the country undocumented when they were underage, and obviously to no fault of their own, not choosing of their own, they have grown as Americans. They might come at a very young age, and after they finish high school, they have no option to go to higher education in some states. Pennsylvania is stuck right now. They haven't passed the DREAM Act, for example, which means that any immigrant student finishing high school, doesn't matter how many honors you received, doesn't matter what kind of academic record you have, what kind of potential you have to pay out-of-state tuition, which is obviously a barrier for new Americans and some of these immigrant families. So many of these very high potential kids that are graduating from high school have no option to go to higher education in this state. Likewise, some of the cities have enforced some of the secure communities programs that have been in place for years. What does this mean? It means that if an immigrant has contact with police and law enforcement, and the law enforcement officer has the suspicion that this person is undocumented, regardless of the reason of the stop or regardless of the reason why the contact came into place, this official has the option of referring and detaining the person to immigration. Obviously, if it was in the carrying out of a drug seize, of a drug deal, then maybe we shouldn't have a problem with that. But the problem is that many of the people that's referred to immigration through secure communities are people that perhaps call the cops for help because they're being victims of crime, or because it's a minor incident in the street, or perhaps it's because they were driving without a license, or because they were driving and they passed a stop sign. And just because you were driving without a license, or your license expired, or your license is from out of state, then they might be referred to immigration, and they're booked into these detention centers who have hundreds of people pretty much waiting for a hearing. And it's obviously a system that is also slow and is backlogged. And then aside of the secure communities and access to in-state tuition, many of the possibilities that we have in many of the states is being able to give them some sort of a driving license. Most of us will understand that in the U.S. we don't have access to great public transportation, especially we need to commute to work that's out of reach. It might take hours to get there if you don't have a car. So these families, although they would love to get a license and get insured and follow the laws, they are left on the border without a real option. And obviously this down the road affects them for amount of tickets and eventual referrals to immigration detention centers. So yes, most of my clients or most of the people I see in community forums reviewing the options of immigration reform or explaining what the law is as it works and the options currently are for them. Most of the immigrants want to see reform. They want to see options. They want to be able to at least be able to work and eventually go back to their country if it's not to become citizens. But we shouldn't forget that there are options in the state. While the House and the Senate move forward, there are options in the state that we have to be able to welcome these people to be part of the communities and eventually contribute. With that, I hope I was brief enough, and I could take more specific questions of what clients face in the Q&A.
Okay. All right. I think one of the themes that came out in all of the conversations was that our current system needs to be reformed. I'd like to just show you or tell you about one example. I'm the executive director at the Pennsylvania Immigration Resource Center of an example of how the system's broken, and then share some facts with you about immigrants and immigration, and then talk about what next. And I'll do that all in 5 minutes, I think. One of the things that we see every day at the Pennsylvania Immigration Resource Center are individuals who have come many times thousands of miles and present themselves at the border to a Customs and Border agent, and they seek asylum. They're not trying to sneak into the country. They're actually walking up to a border agent and saying, I would like to seek asylum. Because they do not have documents, lawful documents to enter the country, they're put into what's called the defensive asylum process. Tom had mentioned two procedures. There's processes. There's an affirmative process. Let's say you come in on a business conference on a visitor's visa, and while you're here, things happen in your home country and you seek asylum. That's the affirmative non-detained process. But what our country does is that when you appear at the border and you seek asylum, having traveled many, many miles, having fled persecution, and you do not have documents, you're detained. So one of the things that we do at PERC is that we represent individuals who have experienced persecution, have witnessed horrific acts, who have come, as I said, many miles to try to come for some kind of safety. And I think that my comment on that would just be that we can do a better job. I don't know that, express an opinion here, that our policy of putting people in prison who have fled persecution is necessarily the right policy. So I would say that's an example of how our system needs to be reformed thoughtfully. I think one of the things, the first thing that we can all do in terms of bringing about change, because I think Tom did a really good job of explaining what the frustrations are within the House and the Senate in terms of bringing about reform. And Oscar did a good job of talking about the frustrations of someone who's here without documents and how it affects their life. But what each of us can do is to be informed. As we've all said, this is a very nuanced issue. So when you talk to your family, when you talk to your friends, when you're within the community, if you can be informed about immigration, have a conversation that's constructive, and then the next step, of course, is to be engaged with your elected officials. That is, I think, how we will end up bringing about change. I'd like to, just with the idea of sharing information and all being informed, I'd like to give you some information about immigrants and immigration. There's a lot of misconceptions. Chris went through some of the misconceptions with foreign workers, and there's a ton in that sense in terms of the labor market and what they do or don't do. Chris mentioned in a lot of ways that workers foreign workers, immigrants here, have a significant impact on our economy in a very positive way. But three of the things that there are misconceptions about is that there's the process to be here legally, the contributions that immigrants make to our economy, and how do immigrants integrate into our communities, including language acquisition. The first thing about legal process you need to understand is that our laws are very, very different than they were 100 years ago. We basically had an open door policy 100 years ago, and your biggest challenge in coming to America was how to get here. There were not the same quotas, there were not the same procedures, there were not the same applications that were necessary that there are today. Really up until 1917, before that there was the Chinese Exclusion Act, 1921, 1924, there was legislation that effectively closed our doors. And it wasn't until 1965 when the INA was created, which is the Immigration Nationality Act, which is the set of statutes that govern everything that we do with immigration, that we put into place the current, it's not really a quota system, but it's a preference system that was intended to create diversity, for immigration, but the effect that it has had now, 48 years later, we have the same laws on our books, has created lines. And it's not as easy as everybody says, we'll just get in line. Well, I can tell you that if you are the child of a legal permanent resident and you are from Mexico, it is literally decades that you must wait in order to come here legally. So it's not a friendly process, and I think that's an example of how the system is broken and really needs to be reformed. Economic contributions, immigrants are 30% more likely to form businesses than U.S. citizens. Immigrants are innovative. They're 3 times more likely to file patents. There are multiple sources of economic data, including the Congressional Budget Office, that show that taxes paid to the federal government by immigrants exceed the benefits that they receive. In 2010, households headed by unauthorized immigrants paid $10.6 billion in state and local taxes, and the money earned by immigrants is poured back in the economy through the purchase of housing, food, gasoline, clothing, and other things that comprise our life. So there's a significant impact to the economy, both for authorized and unauthorized immigrants. Oops, I lost my place. And then the last thing is just integration. I think everybody you hear a lot of grumbling about, well, nobody wants to learn English, right? There's really 5 indicators of how well immigrants integrate into the community, and they are language proficiency, socioeconomic attainment, political participation, where people live, their neighborhoods, and the interaction they have with their host communities. Tom mentioned the Migration Policy Institute. They're a fabulous organization, put out a lot of really great data. They have a great report on just immigrant integration. But what they have found is that it's still working. That just as it was 3 or 4 generations ago, immigrants are integrating into our society. We as a government pretty much have a laissez-faire it's not really a policy, it's laissez-faire. The government really doesn't have a policy towards integration, so we really rely on our strong economy and business environment and our strong education system to really form as the major mechanisms of people integrating. And we rely on organizations like Church World Service to provide English as a second language classes so that people can learn English. Interestingly enough, the first generation usually struggles with English, the second generation is bilingual, and the third generation typically can't talk to their grandparents. That is still true today. So, and really quickly to summarize, what I would say is that what happens next? What can you do? You can be informed. You can continually try to be engaged. You can be an example, not necessarily like nothing personal, but our folks in Congress who don't necessarily speak respectfully to each other, but you can be respectful of each other and the differences of opinion, and you can try to share information. I think that there's also volunteer opportunities. We need English as a second language volunteers. Sheila's mentioned volunteer opportunities with Church World Service, and there are many, many ways that you can be engaged with what has been a part of our history forever, really, which is that people come, with the exception of Native Americans, people come from other places, and that is who we are as Americans. So anyway, in summary, I just thank you very much for including me in this.
I think we have a few minutes left, and what I would suggest we could probably take, if people want to go up to this microphone over here, 1 or 2 questions, and if somebody wants to make their way over there, I have a question as we move on here. Tom Tillett brought up the Senate bill that was passed last June, and there's a lot of concern that the country gravely needs immigration reform. We've heard that here today. We've heard that from everyone. Yet we still can't seem to get there, and as you had mentioned, it does not look good. The Senate bill was bipartisan, and it does seem that the sticking point is the point you talked about, a path to citizenship for undocumented folks who come into this country. And I guess my question is twofold. One is House Republicans, conservative House Republicans, of which I believe Representative Pitts is one, who subscribes to this. This is something to deal with where it doesn't look like there will be any kind of reform. And yet on the other side of the party, we have the former governor from Florida, Jeb Bush, this week talking in a much more different tone about immigration and taking a different tone. I think he called those who come here illegally had no other means to provide for their families often, and he quote unquote called this an act of love, an act of commitment to your family, trying to keep it together. So my question is there any way we can come together here, and how difficult or easy is it for you folks who work in this field to be doing what you do with all of this going on politically around you? Is this becoming increasingly difficult? Does it not seem to matter in the day-to-day of what you do? Can you speak to that at all? Yeah.
Probably I'm not the best person on the panel to speak to that.
I'll start off. It's critical, and there'll be some point in time where Congress is forced to address this issue. It's an everyday occurrence for those in agriculture. It's part of the new topics of discussion because it's critical for our industry. So again, it's very easy. What is long term in politics? Long term is until the next crisis occurs and forces action. So again, a critical issue that is at the forefront of our industry, and we're going to keep hammering away until hopefully there isn't a crisis that forces it. But if that's what it takes, so be it.
First of all, I want to take speaker's privilege here. When I was talking about the politics of immigration reform, one thing that I neglected to say is that before anything really occurs in immigration reform, we talk about securing the borders. That, for a lot of members in the House, certainly conservative Republican members, they talk about the need to secure the borders in a real way. That is reflected in the $46 billion that the Senate authorized for border security as well. When you look at the issue of a pathway to citizenship, that is an enormously complicated and controversial subject. It is what I would call a political hot potato. And it is such a polarizing issue, and it is such a politically divisive issue that in and of itself creates a dynamic that makes it difficult for members to take a strong position in support of a pathway to citizenship. One of the issues that we struggle with is just the issue of fairness, the issue of equity, the issue of, are we condoning illegal behavior? Are we rewarding illegal actions on the part of an individual? When an individual comes to the United States, say on a visitor's visa or a student visa, and it's for 90 days or 120 days or whatever it might be, when that individual is still in the United States on day 90 plus 1 or 120 plus 1, that individual now is here illegally. That individual has broken our law. Roughly half of those 11 million people in the United States are here on visa overstays. So when that individual makes that decision at 1 minute after midnight on day 90 plus 1, they lose a lot of what I would call sort of goodwill. I mean, they came to the United States to visit their mother or their father, or they came here to better themselves through education, and they should be commended for that. But when they stay that extra day, then they lose that. They lose that goodwill because they are now breaking our law. And that's where a lot of members have a hard time in supporting some kind of pathway to citizenship for people that have broken our laws.
If I can just comment on that. I think the frustration, though, is that there is an agreement on what the consequences should be, or how you talked about, all the money that in the proposed Senate bill would be put for border enforcement. I mean, under President Obama, we've had more removals than we had, in the previous administrations. We've had the apprehensions at the border, meaning people that are crossing over, is down. At what point would some of these senators and House members be happy with what is being done in order to say it's okay to have a pathway to citizenship? And I guess that's where I always feel like the line keeps moving, and it's a little frustrating. And I guess I would also just make sort of a political comment, which is that the Republicans, perhaps learned something from the last election, but demographics will overcome this. And there's a cost to doing nothing. And each day that we do nothing, there's a cost to the economy, there's a humanitarian cost, there's a cost to national security, because we don't fingerprint everybody. It'd be nice to know who's here, right? But at some point, the demographics of our nation is going to overtake the Republicans. So that's sort of a political commentary. I guess it's just you had asked how it affects my everyday job. Every day that we work with people in the detention facility and people who are victims of crime, we're seeing the harsh reality of the existing laws. And I think what has happened is that incrementally we make changes to our laws to try to fix what's going on. And I really think that comprehensive reform would get at things like, so if you have an overstay, if you have a mandatory E-Verify program, people have to eat, people have to have a roof over their heads, so they're going to end up getting found out, if you will, because we don't have a good, visa exit entry program to catch people or to identify when they've overstayed. I think our border security, as I mentioned before, is really, really improved, and apprehensions, over years, the total number has increased. So, anyway, I'll let you go.
We have one question over
Yep.
here, and we'll conclude with your question.
I'd like to hear how the panelists involved in immigration reform feel about a Pennsylvania bill to make English the official language.
I could briefly comment. Obviously, I have a bit of an accent. I'm not from here. I'm Colombian. English is my second language, and in college I took on Japanese. In grad school, I went to China. I did some Mandarin as well. Europeans pride themselves of their bilingualism, of at least bilingualism, if we're not saying that 3 or 4 languages are spoken in every family. That a U.S. person is coming forward saying that they're proud of speaking only one language saddens me. And when we travel abroad, we're facing people with just better education and have access to better cultural and knowledge just by speaking other languages. Pennsylvania was one of the first states to allow German speakers to grow their culture by allowing them to teach German in their classrooms, by speaking German in their communities, by having little German towns. And we're also, like in Pennsylvania, proud of the Dutch community and the Dutch culture. Turning the tide into mandatory recognizing English as the state language and being so, quote unquote, it could be hateful, and trying to put aside and damage the integration of many other people just by saying you have no access to anything on your native language. It's going to be deteriorating. Yeah.
And if I could, again, more personal view than representing my organization, there's a lot of really important issues that need to be addressed by Congress and by, our state legislature. A lot of time these things, instead of addressing pension reform and really critical issues, we get caught up in these, these policy type of issues. And though they're important and they're emotional issues, in the end, what do they really solve? And again, spending a lot of time addressing issues that in my opinion, aren't going to really change anything economically or socially, I shy away from encouraging that.
I think we'll end with that. I would like to thank the League and the panelists and all of you for coming today. I wish you a happy Wednesday, and hopefully if you have any other questions, some of these people will stick around for a few minutes. Thank you very much.